Watching Weather First at 4, live on the air and live online at WPBF.com.
For years, those who trusted Madoff with their life savings had to pay taxes on that money they thought they were earning with Madoff. But now we know there was no money. So will Uncle Sam be giving them a refund?
I'm Ted White on Scene in Boca Raton. Just because Bernie Madoff pleaded guilty today, it doesn't mean some local victims can recover some of their losses. Richard Lehman joins me now. He is a tax attorney in Boca Raton. You say some of these victims can actually get help and recover their losses. How so?
Yes, absolutely. The biggest beneficiary of the Bernie Madoff Ponzi scheme so far has been Uncle Sam.
And the best advice is for them to talk to whom?
The best advice is for them to find the right team of a tax lawyer, an accountant, and a litigator, and lay out all of the options that you have from all your sources of recovery.
All right, perfect advice. Good advice for them to know in this Ponzi scheme of Bernie Madoff. On Scene in Boca Raton, Ted White, WPBF News 25.
It's 5 o'clock. This is WPBF News 25, where you always get your weather first.
We're innocent victims. We're not the ones who scammed the public. We're not the ones who gave out bad mortgages. We're not the ones who had bad business practices. We're blameless people.
From his penthouse to the big house, the man who ruined the lives of so many Americans is now spending the rest of his life behind bars. Good evening, I'm Tiffany Kenny, live on Palm Beach. The big story at 5 as we speak. Bernie Madoff is sitting in a jail cell in New York City after admitting to pulling off one of the biggest investment schemes in history. Moments after walking into a New York City courtroom, Madoff pleaded guilty to 11 felony counts. The part-time Palm Beacher then told the judge he was deeply sorry and ashamed and could not adequately express how sorry he was for his crimes. Many of his victims gathered outside the courthouse to see that justice was served.
He's an evil man. He didn't just do it to us. He did it to charities. He did it to pension funds. I mean, he's just an evil friends. He's just an evil person.
Immediately after the hearing, the 70-year-old was whisked to the New York City jail, where he faces 150 years behind bars. Sentencing will take place in June. The Madoff scandal has emptied the bank accounts of many people across the Palm Beaches and the Treasure Coast. We have live team coverage of this story and how it affects you. Bob Capel will have reaction from those hit hardest by the scandal here on Palm Beach. Ted White will explain if victims can expect compensation, and we'll get a look at the local charities affected. Terry Parker will take a closer look at whether Madoff had a helping hand in this scheme. And Lindsay Davis will have the latest on the investigation from New York City. Nowhere does this story hit closer to home than right here in South Florida. Brian Albert kicks off our live team coverage from Boca Raton, where he spoke to many local victims today. Brian?
Tiffany, this is a list of Bernard Madoff's victims, almost 15,000 investors who entrusted the money manager with their life savings. Today, after Madoff pled guilty to swindling those investors out of billions of dollars, a few spoke out in a Manhattan courtroom, but most victims did not get to face off with the part-time Palm Beach resident because they're here in Palm Beach County, an area that felt the effects of this Ponzi scheme as much as any. We spoke with a few of those victims here this afternoon.
And if he said, I'm really sorry, I will return all the money, this is where you can find the money, and I'm sorry that we went through all this, fine. But just to say I'm sorry, it doesn't mean anything.
I had hoped that the 3 months that he was out on bail, that he would have provided some information to the government to help the victims, but it looks like he really didn't.
And that second victim wanted her identity concealed because she's embarrassed about entrusting Madoff with so much money and then losing it all. And both of those.
It is not just investors feeling the effects. Many local charities depended on dollars wiped out by the Madoff scheme. The Pickhour Foundation, which is based right here in Palm Beach County, is the largest organization in the country forced to shut down after losing nearly $1 billion. Kids were often the recipients of the Pickhour's generosity. That foundation donated millions to dozens of local organizations like the Boys and Girls Club, the United Way, and other arts and civic groups.
It's affecting, a lot of children who are in need of services and don't have the wherewithal to do anything else. So this is just a travesty to me that's beyond belief.
Other victims, the West Palm Beach Police Pension Fund lost more than $800,000 in the scam, and the Alpert Jewish Family and Children's Service in West Palm Beach is out nearly $100,000. The question now, will duped investors ever see their money again? Ted White spoke with a prominent Boca Raton tax attorney who says yes. Ted?
Tiffany, this attorney has worked for the federal government before, and he says that should be the first place that they should be looking to recover some of their money.
And a bottle of water, please.
Richard Lehman is a former IRS senior attorney who now practices tax law in Boca Raton. He says he's counseled a number of Bernie Madoff victims throughout the country.
Most of the accounts have more phantom income, more phony profits than real investment in them.
Lehman says if you take away the charities and profit-sharing plans that were associated with Madoff, the federal government made out pretty good when it was time for people to pay their taxes.
Take $30 billion in false profits over the last 15, 20 years, all in roughly the 35% tax bracket. These are high tax bracket people. Uncle Sam made $10 billion because it's taxes that they paid on income that was never there, that Uncle Sam should have never gotten paid on in the first place.
Lehman says Madoff victims could recover up to 30 to 50% of their losses with the help of
a tax lawyer, an accountant, or a litigation lawyer. Because any one of those three who are good and know what they're doing, I believe are going to say, we can't tell you all of your options and all the positions to take unless we have the other two involved.
Lehman says you have to approach this in a professional manner, and it could pay off with the right help and advice.
The right way to handle this is through how you treat your tax losses.
Lehman says some people thought Madoff was such gold that they never took money from the Madoff account because they were just getting such good returns on their money. Then they paid their taxes from other personal accounts. Lehman says it became worse when some people borrowed against Madoff accounts and then had nothing to pay on those loans. Ted White, WPBF News 25.
We will have much more on this story throughout this newscast. Coming up in just a few minutes, we are going to take a closer look at Bernie Madoff, his complex investment scheme, and the toll it has taken on our area.
Our coverage of the Madoff scandal spans from New York to South Florida, from whether victims can expect to see any of their money to the reaction on Palm Beach. Our WPBF News team is on scene.
I'm Ted White on scene in Boca Raton. Just because Bernie Madoff pleaded guilty today, it doesn't mean some local victims can recover some of their losses. Richard Lehman joins me now. He is a tax attorney in Boca Raton. You say some of these victims can actually get help and recover their losses. How so?
Yes, absolutely. The biggest beneficiary of the Bernie Madoff Ponzi scheme so far has been Uncle Sam.
And the best advice is for them to talk to whom?
The best advice is for them to find the right team of a tax lawyer, an accountant, and a litigator, and lay out all of the options that you have from all your sources of recovery.
All right, perfect advice. Good advice for them to know in this Ponzi scheme of Bernie Madoff. On scene in Boca Raton, Ted White, WPBF News 25.
This is WPBF News 25 at 6, where you always get your weather first.
You are looking at the brand new home for Wall Street schemer Bernie Madoff. He is now an inmate at the Metropolitan Correctional Facility. His cell a far cry from his $7 million penthouse in New York City. So how did Madoff make off with billions of dollars? Well, here's how the Ponzi scheme worked. Madoff convinced people to invest their money with him, but instead of actually investing it, Madoff would convince more investors to join him. He would then use their money to pay off the original group. But often, instead of collecting profits, people would simply reinvest with Madoff. The scheme would then build on itself, eventually growing to the billion-dollar fraud Madoff admitted to today. Many people lost their life savings to Madoff when this scheme all started crumbling back in December. Ted White is live back in the newsroom with more on whether Madoff's victims will ever see any of their money again. Ted?
Well, Tiffany, at least one South Florida man says the answer is yes, a man who once worked for the Internal Revenue Service. Richard Lehman was a senior accountant with the IRS. He is now a tax attorney in Boca Raton. He says he's counseled victims of Bernie Madoff's estimated $50 billion Ponzi scheme. Lehman says if you take away the charities and profit-sharing plans that were associated with Madoff, the federal government made out pretty good when it was time for people to pay their taxes.
take $30 billion in false profits over the last 15, 20 years, all in roughly the 35% tax bracket. These are high tax bracket people. Uncle Sam made $10 billion because it's taxes that they paid on income that was never there, that Uncle Sam should have never gotten paid on in the first place.
Lehman says many Madoff victims could recover up to 30 to 50% of their losses with the help of 3 people, a tax attorney, an accountant, and a litigator. He says they can look at your situation and give you the best advice on how to recoup on some of your losses. Ted White, WPBF News 25.